hold on. There is an option. There is hope. It's not going to be an overnight turnaround, but it's going to be turned around. And
the night is darkest just before the dawn,
yes.
and morning is just around the corner. Welcome back, Northern Perspective, everybody. We've mentioned that we had a few more interviews coming up, and we are lucky enough to have one of those individuals with us today. So who we have today is the Conservative candidate that ran in the 2021 election in the riding of Burlington, and she managed to capture 37% of the vote against Karina Gould. She's looking to repeat that by running as a Conservative candidate within the same riding for the next election, whenever it is. So without further ado, welcome to Northern Perspective, Emily Brown.
Thank you for having me. What a great time. Okay.
So you ran in the 2021 election,
Yeah.
and based on your background that I did a little poking in, looks like you've been involved with the EDA, you've been involved in I would say conservatism for a long, long time. You worked in the oil and gas sector way back in the day, turned professor and teacher. What made you want to actually get involved in federal politics and run?
Well, I've been a lifelong conservative ever since I was a child and understood my parents' politics, my grandparents' politics. So it's been lifelong, and I've been involved with the Conservative Party wherever I've lived. So I've been living in Burlington for about 12 years and been involved in prior election campaigns, and then on the riding association board, and then as candidate. So back early 2021, I got an email from the riding association, and I always connect with the person. Thank you for the email. And they started poking around as well in my background, my history, and they were really impressed by an interview that I had done with Steve Paikin on the agenda around my other life, which is numeracy and mathematics. And they said, you've got what we're looking for. And so that started a conversation, and then I put in my papers, did a nomination race, and won. When he asked me, have you ever thought about running into federal politics, I said, yes. And again, they say, women have to be asked. They don't always seek it out, right? And I said, yes, I'm very concerned. I'm concerned about public safety. I'm concerned about our international reputation. I'm concerned about the affordability issue. Those were kind of the three things that I really highlighted last election, and they're worse now. Everything that I spoke about then, I could speak about now in an election campaign, and they're significantly worse, right? So I've, led my life with integrity, and I feel that, I'm the right person for this. And I asked the question, if not me, then who? So here I am.
So as it relates to Karina Gould, she was your opponent.
Yeah.
She would be your opponent this year. We've seen her now, be appointed to House Leader. I think Canadians have really gotten to know who she is based on some of her statements and how she conducts herself on some of her interviews. When you look at her and evaluate her as your opponent, what can Canadians expect of you that's different of her?
Well, one of the things that I see when I see Karina speak or out in the community, she has had several portfolios, and I would say it's easier to run against an incumbent. Others might not think that, but they are literally running against a record that they have had, and in this case for the past 9 years. So it's not, I'll just be better and she won't be better. It's, these are the things that she has done. This is her character, this is her record, and she needs to be responsible for that and held responsible to the situation that Canadians find themselves in now, right? With all of those things: public safety, affordability, international reputation, and a plethora of other things, right? So with respect to Karina, she's had, MP Gould, she has had 3 big files. The first one was electoral reform, which never happened, as you know, and it seems like if I was to analyze someone's professional journey, you know, when you're kind of moved aside without completing a task, you know, I think it reflects, it says something, you know, about either the policies of the party or something about that individual and the work they do. Then during COVID, of course, there was the public services, and so we know we had those long lineups at the passport office. In fact, we still have lineups and holdups with a lot of those public services, CRA, people not getting you know, timely responses and timely solutions, and then to the family services where you know, we've seen her go across the country touting the $10 a day daycare, which, you know, if you really dig into it, you see that there are daycares closing. You know, Burlington had a big one close with a week's notice. And you have a young child, so you know what that would be like. You know, you've got a job or you've got other responsibilities, and suddenly your daycare closes. And of course, that doesn't mean there's openings somewhere else. So I know in Burlington specifically, there are places that have 2 and 3 year wait lists and so on. So we know that that's not quite as effective. For me, you know, again, you know, I'm not going to run on policies. Those are the things that the party decides, and our leader, Pierre Poilievre, decides together with those who are in his caucus. But, you know, I would run on my character. I have always been responsible and hardworking and, you know, done a job to the best of my ability every time in any role I've had. So I would say that's how I'm going to run, is on my character and my ability to do those things. So.
And you mentioned character. I think probably for the first time in recent history in Canadian politics, there are now millions of Canadians paying attention, more than they ever have possibly in the history. And I think based on what this Liberal government has demonstrated in terms of their corruption, in terms of their disregard, and how out of touch they are, character is, I think, high on the list for what people are looking for. So when Canadians are looking for change, and they're looking at new politicians such as yourself, what do you think they are looking for in that character?
Well, it's funny you asked that, because I am an educator, and one of the things educators do is, you know, try and engage people in conversation and thinking and so on. And one of the things I did before the last election was I sort of sent out an ask to, you know, friends and colleagues and students, and I said, if you were to give 3 qualities of me that you would like to see in an MP, you know, that kind of overlap, you know, the Venn diagram, if you will. And I created a Wordle of that, you know, with all the words.
I
and,
saw
you know,
that.
like the biggest words are the ones that come up most often. And, you know, the 2 biggest were authentic and intelligent. And I think authentic is so important to really be with someone. And we've seen this Liberal government not be real and authentic with people. You know, they're not listening to what people are saying, or they wouldn't be considering raising the carbon tax. You know, we're looking at, there was a graph recently by the food professor, and he showed this graph that saw a decrease in spending on food, which, okay, at face value, you can kind of, you know, query about that. But then I said, what if we overlap the graph of the number of people using food banks? And you can see that at the time when these, you know, decrease in spending on food was occurring, you know, an increase in attendance at the food bank was going up. So people are spending less on food, but they're getting their food from food banks. And the reason for that is all their other expenses have been going up, right? Home heating, fuel to get to their job, to pay their expenses, their housing. You know, right now we are seeing people renew their mortgages, or people having to, you know, if they can't afford their mortgage, they sell their home. Now they're trying to find rental in a very high, you know, rental market. So, you know, we're seeing that trend. Where can people get help? Relief is food banks, right? So I think, you know, the Liberals right now, they just simply aren't listening to what Canadians are saying. And they're screaming it loud and clear. We can't afford to live anymore. We can't afford housing. We can't find housing. And they're just not listening. They're just blindly going forward with their policies that really don't seem to have an impact. If you look at the carbon tax, have we seen a reduction in greenhouse gases? Is that what's driving this policy? You mentioned that I worked in the oil and gas sector. Even back then, a lot of the things we did were, how do we get fuel? How do we get fuel more efficiently? How do we use our innovation technology to actually burn fuels cleaner? What additives can we use to do those things? Like it's not like the oil and gas sector is not, engaged in doing things to improve, the environment, right? So, it just seems like they're not listening, and they're just going about their way without really understanding the pain that Canadians are feeling. I get calls and emails from people who, they say, can I come to your office? Well, I don't have an office. I'm just kind of like you, but I can meet you at a coffee shop, and I can talk to you. And most of what I can offer is, empathy, and also, okay, I know someone who is a sitting Conservative member who may be able to take this on, or who may be able to advise further. And so I try and do that, but the stories I'm hearing are really awful. And I'm an empath, so I take that in, and it's really difficult, to not be able to do something myself for folks, right?
Well, and you see what's happening in the economy with the interest rates coming down. The Liberals are celebrating that as a victory, but are you seeing what we're seeing, in that the interest rates coming down as now quickly as they are, versus the worst GDP per capita in possibly the G7? Our economy has shrunk since before COVID. These are not good signs of the economy, are they?
No, they aren't. And productivity's always been low, but it's at an all-time low. I teach business financial math, compound interest, the effect of interest rises. And, Chrystia Freeland would suggest, well, we're going to get people into the market by extending the rate, how long you can have a mortgage, 30 years. Then we're kind of into, generational debt.
Yes.
It's literally a debt you'll never pay off. And when you look at, your monthly payments, and you see how much is interest and how much is actually taken off the principal, it's horrific. And it would be a very depressing thing if people really were aware. Also, it was funny because, I've been out door knocking, meeting people, meet and greets and so on. And at the door, somebody said to me, well, my mortgage payment hasn't gone up. And I'm a math teacher. I'm like, well, you've had this interest rate, and now the interest rate's gone up, and so, well, your monthly payment must have increased. But they have also that type of mortgage where the payment stays the same, but the time that you have to pay your mortgage is just extended. So they're under this bizarre illusion that they're still making the same payment, and they'll still finish,
at the same
their
time.
mortgage payments at the same time.
So they don't understand that they're paying less principal and all interest. And
right, and that they thought they had, a 25-year mortgage, but this type of program extends it, a year, 2 years, whatever, just to keep the payment the same, right?
they're a math teacher.
Well, no, I'm a math teacher.
Oh,
they're
you're
not.
a math teacher. I thought you said they were.
No, they're not. And, at the door, can you explain all that to them? I mean, you try. But.
Well, and I imagine that's tough when you're talking about subjects like that, because you have to err on the side of you don't want to feel like you're patronizing these
Not
people.
At all, yeah.
But you also want to inform people of what's going on.
Yeah.
And one of the other issues that we've seen, and no doubt you're seeing, is the impact of especially Justin Trudeau carving out these different groups of acceptable Canadians and unacceptable Canadians.
Yeah.
And that has created a lot of vitriol between those groups towards each other, just for the words of the Prime Minister. So do you find that the people that you're talking to now, they are more staunch Liberals than perhaps they would have been, 15 years ago?
Yes and no. I've met a lot of people who have said, I've only voted Liberal ever. So I try and process that first. But they also continue to say that they don't recognize the Liberal Party in the form that it's in, and they certainly don't approve of the actions of the Prime Minister. And so they're trying to reconcile that and what they're going to do in the next election. It's said that we're always looking for the people in the middle who are undecided, and I would suggest now, in the past, few years, everyone has sat up and taken notice. I've never had a situation where I've walked into my classroom and there's a gathering of 4, 5, 6 students who are talking about politics, unprompted by me. It's their conversation, and they're talking about their prospects when they graduate. They're talking about, like how much it costs them for their tuition to get to school. When are they going to leave their parents' home? What's going to happen to them? And they're actually paying attention. And I don't think I've ever witnessed that in that sort of, 18 to 25 group. They're paying attention. And I think that's really important, getting involved and understanding what's going on. And, I've got two children, 34 and 32 years old. They're in that pinch where, they can't see themselves affording a family, a home. My oldest one has just bought a condo. But he's paying hugely for that. A small condo in Calgary, like not one of the big expensive ones in downtown Toronto, but it's still a struggle with 2 of them working full-time hours. How does that happen? You do all the right things, like Pierre Poilievre says, you go to school, or you do an apprenticeship, you find a field where you're, going to engage professionally, hoping that you work hard and you take a paycheck home and you're able to cover your debts. And we look at, in the past, and I remember my first home and my first mortgage was in 1983, and there were actually programs with the federal and the provincial government at that time to build new houses. And so you got a $5,000 loan and a $3,000 grant. I think the $3,000 was federally and the $5,000 was provincial, and you paid the $5,000 loan when you sold the home in the future. And interest rates were 17 or 18%.
Wow.
Yeah, but the homes were not $1 million. My first house was $80,000. So, like on balance, it was affordable. It was manageable. But now we're seeing high home prices because of supply issues, and we're seeing higher mortgages, and people who were told by this government, borrow, spend. We've got you. Interest rates aren't going up, and what that's created is, Canadians that have the highest, commercial debt or consumer debt,
home debt, yeah,
and also home debt. So I was saying, when I got my first mortgage, the idea was at the bank, a third of your income is what's manageable and what we recommend, and so we did the numbers and said, okay, well, we can do it. Now, what is it, over 40%, 46%, I think people are spending on their homes. That's too much, because you don't have enough left over for the other stuff you have to have.
Yeah, and we've been looking into information that the Canadian Taxpayers Federation has put out, and 46%, I believe, of our income is now going to taxes.
Yeah, it's between 43 and 46%. I don't remember the exact number, but it's quite high. Yeah.
So,
unbelievable.
So when you look at that, then you look at food, then you look at clothes, and Canadians aren't surviving. And it seems like this government believes that the government should literally be providing everything in your life, which is akin to a certain type of government,
exactly.
That is not democratic and has never been demonstrated to provide any sort of freedom or effectiveness throughout history. So when you look at that, and then you compound the corruption on top of that, the policies are bad enough.
They are.
And I think most Canadians would disagree with the policies, but then you add the corruption on top of that. What is your perspective? Not being in the house, you're looking at this from the outside. What is your perspective? All the corruption on there, and the lack of accountability, and I wouldn't even say lack of, no accountability.
Yeah. I am sitting on the outside, of course, but looking deeply in. I'm watching the House of Commons proceedings. I'm watching committee. I'm engaging with folks like Larry Brock or Garnet Gaines, who are really involved in pulling back the veil on the Arrive Can app. I shall use the correct term. And it is horrific when you see Canadians who cannot afford their expenses, their reasonable expenses anymore, that people who are close to the government, there's no scrutiny with respect to contracts, with respect to who does work for the government. I don't think people really understand how much money is wasted. So, when the Liberals say, well, the Conservatives are going to cut everything. Well, as Garnet said, we're not going to cut anything that you see, feel, or what's the other word? See, feel, or hear, or something. Anyway, basically, it's going to be cutting those places where the government has severely wasted money, where they have sent corrupt money. And say, no, we're not going to do that anymore, right? We're not going to have layers of people getting contracts simply to give other people contracts, which is what we're seeing with seemingly with SG Strategies and with the Arrive Can, right? How, and I don't even think people understand the size of those numbers. Millions turning into thousands, turning into millions, turning into billions. And no accountability. And then again, we've got our MP Gould saying, we're not showing you any of these documents because that's not what we do, and that does that kind of transparency.
They'll erode your freedoms. So.
Right.
No,
yeah.
What she said was that it was a charter violation for the government to provide the unredacted documents. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, for the SDTC scandal.
Yeah.
I mean, bottom line is they don't have money; they have our money. And, when you're running a family budget, you sit down with whoever else is involved in that family earning and family spending, and you say, where am I going to spend? Where am I going to save? We have an exceptional capital expense, so where's that going to come from? And, Pierre will say, it's $1 spent has to be $1 saved somewhere. That's how we do things, I'm sitting there with a deck that needs to be replaced. Well, I can't do that and, do the driveway, which was also...
Just cancel your Disney Plus.
I know. Yeah, I should cancel Disney Plus. I mean, it's absurd, right? And so there are people who, are letting maintenance go on their car because, well, right? But then sooner or later that's going to catch up. They're letting maintenance go in their home and wherever they live, and that's going to catch up with them. Health, you don't eat healthily, then you're going to be ill. That's going to catch up. All of these things. And, to realize that the government does not have Canadians' best interests at heart, and to take our money and, spend it without any accountability or any sense of responsibility or, I believe in servant leadership. You serve your community. They're not serving our community. They're not listening, And, Canada's big, and we have a lot of different communities with a lot of different needs, and our responsibility is to bring our community's needs to Ottawa, but also to reason that out with, balance it with the needs of other communities. But they're simply not doing that. They're just doing whatever they want and spending, as they wish, and on corrupt things, right? So,
when you're door knocking, what is the number one thing that your community is telling you that they need right now?
The number one concern really is affordability. They're worried about, their housing costs, their food costs, their costs of getting to work, their costs of heating their homes, lighting their home, all of those things. So that's the big thing. In Burlington now, we're also hearing more about public safety, car thefts, home invasions. In the last election, I talked a lot about human trafficking, and people said, well, it doesn't happen here. Yeah, it does. And I had an individual reach out to me specifically because of that and say, I've never heard a politician talk about that, and now it's really in the news. it's during COVID, I think it was 2021, there was a 400% increase in human trafficking.
Oh my
How
gosh.
is that possible? I mean, my first thought was, wait, aren't we all supposed to be at home? Wasn't that the whole thing, was we were locked down and at our homes? It is shocking. And in fact, I have conversations, with my students. I teach a lot of international students, and I say, I'll see you next week, please be safe. And I think, why, what am I thinking about? I'm thinking about, misadventure. I'm thinking about their money issues and what they may be enticed to get involved with because of the affordability, at that level, being here as an international student. So, public safety. I mean, the first thing really is car thefts. People think, oh, well, 3 car thefts on the same street. How are we going to stop that? And then we can talk to them about, well, how come this person has been arrested for stealing cars 3 times in the last month? Okay, well, that brings a conversation about the bail issue.
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing repeat and violent offenders back on the street to reoffend. We're seeing people who are, that young woman, the 18-year-old that ran over the...
with the Porsche?
With the Porsche.
Yeah.
And then you find out, oh, wait a minute, well, this individual has been, has other charges in other areas, been out on bail for the same things. We're literally putting Canadians at risk over and over again, people being put back out on our streets. So, so those things, affordability for sure. I mean, people have gone from, having a prime rib Sunday family dinner to meatloaf. That's okay. But, it's a change in pattern, and it's an affordability issue. People simply can't afford. And again, that idea of, food bank use versus money spent on food as a household. Those are trends you can't deny.
Well, and we also hear from many of our viewers that, they will eat every other day. They will have one meal a day. It's really heartbreaking just to hear that. And I imagine, the decline in food spend also will probably pretty closely mirror the rise of homelessness and everyone having to live in tents and everything like that. And the fact that they have a graph that shows food spend going down versus the amount of new immigrants that come in, that should tell us something as well, because if there's that many new people coming in to be able to spend money on food, but the food spend is going down, that should be raising alarm bells all over this government. And it seems like the only places that it is raising alarm bells is everywhere but the Liberal Party. Do you think that's because they are just that out of touch, or do you think that's because they believe if they admit that there's a problem, that will finally be the nail in their coffin?
Well, the Minister of Immigration has stepped up and said, yeah, it got ahead of us. It's out of control. I mean, I've seen it. I've definitely seen it within my school, international students and so on. The ability to find safe, clean accommodation and to be able to afford food and getting to school and so on. The government lied to the House and lied to Canadians by saying, oh, we've let in this many Canadians this year. There's an immigration lawyer, I heard him on the news some time ago, out of Vancouver, and he had different numbers than the government shared, to the point where, in 1 year there was, 1.2 million let in or something. And, we have to understand there are different streams of people who come to Canada. Mm-hmm. And I think people kind of lump everyone together and, and they're horrified, and the number added together is a horrific number, because how can we absorb that all at once? And we can't. That's clear. We were seeing that. But, there are immigrants, who come in, and they are sort of, they want to come to Canada, and they have a profession, and they apply for immigration.
They follow the process.
Yeah, they follow the process. Then there's refugees, and we've seen that, we've had, people streaming across the border, and we were told that stopped, but, clearly it hasn't. We have, hotels full of refugees who either haven't been processed, or we just don't know where else they can go. Then we have the foreign temporary workers, and again, those are temporary. Again, that's so maybe we need for harvest or for some kind of exceptional project, and we bring in their skill set, and that's fine. And the temporary idea is literally you do the job and then you return home. And then we have the international student body. So I would say that international students, the majority do intend to get permanent residency and do intend to become Canadian citizens. That's kind of, you know, the idea. And, you know, in the media, you see that you know, path to citizenship, path to permanent residency, you know, I would suggest that's probably correct, right? But what's happening now is, you know, students actually aren't seeing the benefits of being in Canada because they, you know, in their student years, they can't find a good place to live, and they can't afford, you know, the other things, the food and so on. So some are actually saying, I'm going back to, you know, back home. My dad has a construction business. I'm going back home, and I think I've now acknowledged I'm going to go work in his business, right? So some more than ever are saying they're just going to go home. You know, some who came here with that solid point system. I had some conversations with students some semesters ago, and again prompted by them, where they said, you know, we're pretty upset about this whole international student and immigration thing. And I said, oh, do tell, like what is your concern? So they all came here, you know, as international students. They speak the language, they're healthy, you know, they've already, you know, they've come and had a diploma, got a diploma, come back. This was a degree course, so they had come back to complete their degree. And they said that they had, you know, 400 points or whatever, the point system, and that let them in. And they said to me, you know, on this particular date in 2020, people were let in with points as low as 76. So they're up in arms with me saying, well, that means that they may not be healthy. They may not have graduated high school. They may not even speak English. And so what they're concerned is they're being painted with that brush, and they're working hard. And one fellow had 2 jobs, he and going to school. He was at school, he was worked at a bank, and he also managed a fast food restaurant. I thought, how do you literally juggle everything? But they're upset. And so this is part of that division as well that this Trudeau government has created. People who came here as immigrants, you know, either their first generation or even second generation, they're saying, well, wait a minute, you know, we came here, we established ourselves, our whole family worked hard. You know, now the doors seem open and people aren't able to support themselves because there aren't jobs, there isn't accommodation for them. And they're feeling, you know, like they want to push back, right? Because of their experience. You know, my family came to Canada, my first ancestors 192 years ago. So I'm old stock Canadian, I guess, and I wear that hat proudly. But, you know, it's interesting that the first and second generation immigrants are having this sort of visceral reaction to what's happening. You know, they're talking about capping international students, you know, coming in. One of the weird things that happened during COVID was, you know, international students came in, and with that study visa, they were allowed to work 20 hours a week. Okay, so part-time job. Our domestic students would do the same. That seems reasonable enough. And then there was a time when it went up to 40 hours a week. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking, wait a minute, 40 hours a week, that's pretty much a full-time job. And then you're studying full-time. Exactly where does the balance lie? And I know, you know, you get students who say, Miss, I can't come to class on Thursday because I've got a shift at work. Okay, you're here as an international student. You're a student. So, you know, studying and doing your work and being in class, that's your priority. And then it went back down to 20. And that was for a couple of years. Like, they'd get a visa for 2 years. So then what happened was there was competition even within that international student workforce.
For the jobs.
You'd see the lineups of international students and others were looking for a job. So there's one job, 10 jobs, and there's hundreds of people lined up to get that job. And so the employer's saying, well, can you work 20 hours or 40? What's on your visa? So then the 20-hour-a-week people were being discriminated against because, well, we want 40 hours a week. And, you know, they're also being mistreated by landlords. You've seen that in the news. And I know personal experience where I've helped students get out of very unsavory positions. And also the workplace. Well, you've got to work these hours or you're going to be fired. You've got to work these hours or you'll lose your visa. So we're trying to educate students in their, you know, responsibilities and their right here as an international student, right? And now you see a lot of rallies and, you know, like political rallies saying, we're here, we're students, and we have rights and we want to stay here, right? And so you have to look at the agreement. How did you enter Canada? You entered Canada as an international student. That was a temporary agreement. We educate you. You become, a part of our culture, our community for that 2 years or 4 years. And then you go back and you take that back to your country where we're going to be trading partners. We're going to have a network built. We're going to have relationships with people all around the world. And that's how this, I've been an international student twice in my life, actually.
And you came back.
In Poland and in Japan. And so I came back and, love the experience, love that closeness to that culture, and have, built relationships and network in those countries and others. So, we've got to be smart about that.
Well, and this is where the issue, starts to get toxic, because I think there's a lot of anger out there because of affordability, and because Trudeau's MO seems to be to, deflect it against specific groups. Now you have people actually blaming the immigrants that are actually coming in this country. And what we try and tell people is, listen, they're being told, come on into Canada. That's the messaging that they're getting. So you can't blame the people for actually following the process. You have to blame the government that is actually implementing that process and not capping immigration and allowing this many people in. People are going to do what they can do within the rules. So if the rules are providing a bad result, then you have to change the rules. And I think that's where we're at.
It's horrible that these young people were promised something that they're definitely not getting. And, that's a painful reality when you see them struggling and you see them questioning, their choice of being here, because they were promised something, whether it's by, bad recruiters in their home country. I work in a very respectable post-secondary school. We provide education that provides, academic credentials that provide professional, work skills. So, we see these, career colleges that, have campuses, that are like storefront size, that don't have classrooms and actual faculty, and somehow those have been allowed to take hold here in Canada, and that needs to be stopped immediately, and reviewed. All of these recruiters all around the world.
So one thing that we also hear from people is there's no hope. It's pointless. What do you say to those people?
Well, I have had this conversation quite a few times with people in the community, family members. One close family member, says, well, there's just no hope left, no matter what. I feel I've said, hold on, there is an option. There is hope. It's not going to be an overnight turnaround, but it's going to be turned around. And one of the things that I would want to see from the Conservative Party and the new Conservative government is really in the first 100 days, making 3 big, big changes that people can see. And I think the people who vote Conservative are going to be pleased to have a Conservative government, and they're going to be rejoicing, and that's fine, because, they are looking at that as a sign of hope and change. Those who didn't are going to be, looking through, more critical eyes, saying, okay, you said you were going to do this. What are you going to do? When are we going to see that? And we do need to gain the trust of those people who may not have been quite so sure, who may have voted against the Liberal government, or who may not have voted Conservative or other parties at all. We need to be able to say, okay, well, these are the things we said, whether it's, changing the bail rules so that we actually are keeping, repeat and violent offenders in prison. We're not letting them out. We're looking at their status here in Canada. Okay, wait a minute, you've been committing crimes and you're not even a permanent resident or Canadian citizen, so what are we gonna do with those folks? Where we, axe the carbon tax, like Pierre Poilievre has been very clear, so he's going to be making those changes, and hopefully relatively quickly people will see some ease somewhere. At the pump, I would say immediately. At the grocery stores, maybe less immediately, but
take some time to get through the system.
Take some time to that trickle down supply chain and where the prices change. So yeah, I would like to see some immediate changes so that people can kind of go, okay, I can trust that changes are coming and that I can have hope. I mean, I've talked to so many people where they've said, I'm out of here. Young people, smart people, engineers, doctors, of course. We're seeing that with capital gains tax. It's like people are retiring early. They were retiring early. Now they're responsible for 2/3 of that capital gains. It's not just rich people, not at all.
No,
What the Liberals tell you is just nonsense. So we're seeing young people saying, "Yep, I'm out of here." And I mean, I've said I don't have a plan B. This is my home. This is where my ancestors came, and we've fought for the country in 2 wars and peacekeeping, and we're here. We're here to stay. So we just have to make it better and have that hope that we are going to see improvement.
Well, and we've we've seen it as well. Like as bad as things can get, we've seen, especially our community, really come together, and we've seen the positive impact that they can have, and that's where we tell our audience, just the fact of what we've seen through Northern Perspective, that gives us hope, and Canada's going to be okay. I think that I agree. I think people just need to hold on. The government is, I think, on the last mile. I think everybody can see that. Even the political pundits on the mainstream Liberal favoring networks, they are now saying this. There's even talk of a Christmas election now because of what's happening. It's coming. And as we say, the night is darkest just before the dawn, and morning is just around the corner. So
during the last election, when I was not successful, people said to me, like, they were encouraging. It's not always about the candidate. Sometimes it's outside of our control, but also they said, it's not bad enough yet. That's what people said to me after 2021. And to me, I thought it was bad enough. I was already seeing people who couldn't afford things, who, had been victims of crime, already then. And so I was kind of disturbed by that comment. It was meant to console, but it was quite disturbing because I thought, how much worse can it get? And here we are, astronomical debt, deficit spending. Again, as someone who teaches math and financial math, I know the impact of that. Even if others think, well, it's just another set of zeros, I know the impact of that. And we look at, debt servicing. When you look at the debt servicing and you think what good things they could be doing, that money could be doing in our community, and, the Liberal government has just frittered it away, and now we're paying for that debt, and our kids will pay for it, and our grandkids, and so on. So there is hope, but we can't. I said I can't imagine what it going to be like if we wait another year for an election. How much more damage can this government do, and all of their, cohorts that support them?
Well, the good news is Jagmeet's pension is activated in February. So
that's what I thought. Yeah.
So I think at worst it's going to be a spring election, and just strategically, the NDP and the Bloc, they can't wait until right before an election before they say, oh, okay, well, now we don't support the Liberals. So, so I think at worst it's going to be a spring election.
Metaphorically, new beginnings, spring. I like that. You know? I think I like that better than door knocking in a parka.
I'm sure, but I imagine a lot of Canadians would love Santa to have an election in a sack.
Yeah,
so
I know. Yeah, Christmas is going to look different for a lot of people this year too, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So, but I think things are just going to continue to disintegrate in governments.
Speaking of elections, what kind of help do you need during an election season, and how can Canadians get involved with their EDA?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I mean, Pierre would say time, talent, and treasures, those 3 things. So any time you can spend volunteering, any talent you have, if you happen to have a specific skill that, might come in handy. And then treasure, there's always a need for money for whatever expenses we have, brochures and email programs and so on. Right now, I'm sitting in the middle of a nomination race, so I am not the candidate yet. Volunteers, outreach. In a nomination race, it's like an election within an election. And so within this Conservative Party nomination, people who have who are members of the Conservative Party, they are the ones who are eligible to vote within their riding. So if you're a member of the Conservative Party within the Burlington riding, you will get notice if there is a vote taking place. So if there's more than one candidate approved, then you'll be invited to come and vote. And that's taking place in all different ridings as well. We had riding redistribution because of
yes.
the last census. So whenever they have a big census, they look at where people are living now and say, well, we want our MPs to represent, largely the same number of constituents. This year it was 116,000 plus a little bit. So they did some, movement of riding. So Burlington thankfully stayed the same. We have the same board. We have, still our bank account and we're election ready, and we have, the same potential solid candidate. So we're ready. But yeah, look up Burlington Conservative Association. Look up emilybrown.ca, and there's lots of opportunities.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, it was great to chat with you, Emily. From what we've seen and from what we've heard, you sound like a perfect candidate for the riding of Burlington.
Thank you.
And we hope to interview one day as Member of Parliament for Burlington. So
that's the plan. Thank you so much for your time today.